United States District Court. For the blank district of blank blank division. Case No. Plaintiffs. Parkman, Arthur Ray. Versus. Defendants. Andalusia Ford LLC. Closing parenthesis. 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 Jury trial. Check 1, yes, no. Petition to enforce the acceptance of a bill of exchange as legal tender for payment of debt obligations. Non-prisoner complaint. Table of contents. Table of authorities. Introduction. Jurisdiction. Historical background. Definitions. Statement of facts. Legal framework and analysis. Relief requested. Conclusion. Table of authorities. Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, Section 401, T6, Subsection 18. Federal Reserve Act, Section 403(0). Joint Resolution 10, Public Law 73-10. Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Section 3-104, 9-203, and 9-207. 12 U.S. C. Section 347. Securities Act of 1933, Section 2 and 17. 59 Stat. 237, Section 2. Case Law. First National Bank of Boston v. Fairhaven Amusement Co. 347 Mass. 243, 1964. In Ray Bristol Associates Inc. 505 F2D 1056 3rd. Civ. 1974. Matter of Copeland. 531 F2D 1195 3rd. Civ. 1976. Buffalo Evening News Inc. v. Small Business Administration. 666 F Sup. 467 W. D. N. Y. 1987. Halpern v. FBI. 181 F 3rd 279 4th Civ. 1999. Treasury Guidelines. IRM 21. 1. 7. 9. 22 April 19, 2012. Introduction. The plaintiff, Arthur Parkman Jr., brings this action to enforce the recognition and acceptance of a bill of exchange as a lawful instrument of payment for the discharge of debt obligations, as explicitly defined under federal statutes and regulatory frameworks. This petition asserts that defendants' refusal to acknowledge the accepted bill of exchange as legal tender violates numerous federal statutes, Treasury regulations, and established case law governing such instruments. Plaintiff further demonstrates that the bill of exchange was issued and presented in compliance with all federal laws governing remittances, pledges, and payments, including its recognition under the Borrower in Custody BIC program. The bill of exchange is explicitly authorized by Congress as legal tender when used to discharge debt or tax obligations. Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, Section 401 and Section 403(0) clearly confirm the equivalence of bills of exchange to national banknotes, Federal Reserve notes, and other instruments authorized for payments of public and private debts. Congress has further emphasized that any instrument included under the BIC program must have demonstrable value and cannot be received for less than its par value under 59 Stat. 237, Section 2. Plaintiff provided the defendant with a bill of exchange and supporting instruments including a promissory note tendered under the BIC program, both of which constitute legally recognized securities under the Securities Act of 1933. Defendants' refusal to accept the tender violates federal law, including provisions governing pledged collateral, legal tender instruments, and uniform standards for currency established under Congress's Article 1, Section 8 powers. This petition seeks an order compelling defendant to recognize and accept the bill of exchange as full satisfaction of the obligation. Plaintiff further demands a declaration that defendant's refusal to accept the instrument violates both federal statutes and the constitutional authority of Congress to regulate legal tender instruments. The plaintiff now invokes the jurisdiction of this court to address the unlawful refusal of the defendant to comply with federal laws governing the acceptance of legal tender instruments. Jurisdiction. This court has jurisdiction over this matter pursuant to 28 U.S.C. Section 1331, as the case arises under the laws of the United States, including the Federal Reserve Act, the Securities Act of 1933, and the Uniform Commercial Code. The matter also implicates constitutional provisions, including Article 1, Section 8, which vests Congress with the authority to regulate currency and its legal tender status. Federal jurisdiction is further supported by the fact that the plaintiff's claims involve the interpretation and enforcement of federal statutes, including 12 U.S.C. Section 347 and 59 Stat. 237, Section 2, which governs the validity and enforceability of bills of exchange and other negotiable instruments. The defendant's refusal to accept the bill of exchange violates statutory duties arising from these federal laws, placing the matter squarely within this court's purview. The defendant is subject to the jurisdiction of this court as they operate within the United States and engage in activities regulated by federal statutes, including the Federal Reserve Act and related Treasury regulations. Plaintiff's claims further arise under federal law due to the defendant's participation in the Borrower in Custody (BIC) program, which explicitly involves federal oversight and regulation. Venue is proper under 28 U.S.C. Section 1339, because the defendant resides, conducts business, or has agents within this judicial district. The events giving rise to this action, including the tender and refusal of the bill of exchange, occurred within this jurisdiction. This court has supplemental jurisdiction under 28 U.S.C. Section 1367 for any related claims arising from state law to the extent they complement or are derived from the federal claims asserted herein. Historical background. Congress has long recognized the legal equivalence of negotiable instruments, such as bills of exchange, promissory notes, drafts, trade acceptances, and bankers' acceptances, as currency for venue is proper under 28 U.S.C. Section 1391, because the defendant resides, conducts business, or has agents within this judicial district. The events giving rise to this action, including the tender and refusal of the bill of exchange, occurred within this jurisdiction. This court has supplemental jurisdiction under 28 U.S.C. Section 1367 for any related claims arising from state law to the extent they complement or are derived from the federal claims asserted herein. Historical background. Congress has long recognized the legal equivalence of negotiable instruments, such as bills of exchange, promissory notes, drafts, trade acceptances, and bankers' acceptances, as currency for the purpose of paying debts and obligations. The Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, codified this equivalence by authorizing Federal Reserve banks to treat these instruments as securities of equal standing to national banknotes and circulating notes. This statutory framework reflects Congress's intent to ensure uniformity and reliability in the instruments used to satisfy debts. Under the Joint Resolution 10, Public Law 73-10, Congress reaffirmed that all forms of U.S. currency and equivalent instruments, including Federal Reserve notes, circulating notes, and bills of exchange, are legal tender for the payment of all debts, public and private. This resolution further extended the definition of legal tender to include any instrument recognized by federal law as a security or remittance instrument. The Borrower in Custody (BIC) program, authorized under the Federal Reserve Act, and Federal Reserve Operating Circular No. 10, provides a mechanism for depository institutions to pledge instruments, including promissory notes and bills of exchange, as collateral to the Federal Reserve. Under the program's requirements, no instrument may be pledged unless it has demonstrable value, as confirmed by periodic certifications and compliance reports submitted by participating institutions. Federal law prohibits the acceptance or valuation of pledged instruments below their par value. This is codified under 59 Stat. 237. Section 2, which mandates that pledged securities, including bills of exchange, must be accepted at face value. This reinforces the principle that all instruments recognized as legal tender retain full enforceability and applicability for the payment of debts. The plaintiff's tender of a bill of exchange, along with a promissory note under the BIC program, complies fully with these established legal principles. Defendants' refusal to accept these instruments constitutes a direct violation of federal law, as well as established Treasury regulations governing remittances and payments. Definitions. Bill of exchange. A bill of exchange is defined under the Uniform Commercial Code (UCC) Section 3-104 as a negotiable instrument requiring the payment of a specified sum of money, either on demand or at a fixed future date. It is legally recognized as legal tender when used for the discharge of debt obligations, as provided under the Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, Section 401, and confirmed in Treasury Guidelines IRM 21. 179. 22, April 19, 2012, which state, if a bill of exchange or registered bill of exchange is received from a taxpayer authorizing the campus to settle their account through Fedwire, send everything to receive to the Department of the Treasury Office of Executive Secretary, with acknowledgement of its acceptance as a remittance. Quote. Legal tender. Under Joint Resolution 10, Public Law 73-10, legal tender is defined as coin, currency, or instruments authorized by Congress for the payment of public or private debts. This includes Federal Reserve notes, national bank notes, circulating notes, bills of exchange, trade acceptances, bankers' acceptances, and drafts. These instruments are legally enforceable for settling obligations, as recognized under 59 Stat. 237, Section 2, which ensures that such instruments must be accepted at par value. Remittances and payments. Treasury regulations explicitly include remittances and payments via bills of exchange as authorized methods of discharging tax liabilities or other financial obligations. According to Treasury Guidance IRM 21. 179. 22. A properly executed bill of exchange is recognized as a valid remittance instrument, equivalent to lawful money when used for these purposes. Pledged collateral. Pledged collateral under the Borrower in Custody (BIC) program includes negotiable instruments such as promissory notes, bills of exchange, and bankers' acceptances. as mandated by the Federal Reserve Operating Circular Number 10. Pledged collateral must have demonstrable value and cannot be accepted for less than its par value under 59 Stat. Section 2. These instruments serve as security for advances made by Federal Reserve banks under 12 U.S. C. Section 347. Face value. Par value. Par value is the nominal or stated value of a negotiable instrument, such as a bill of exchange or promissory note. Federal law mandates that all instruments accepted under the BIC program or pledged to the Federal Reserve must be valued at par, prohibiting any discounting of their worth. This principle is outlined in the Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, Section 401, and enforced under 59 Stat. 237, Section 2. Statement of facts. The plaintiff lawfully tendered a bill of exchange as payment for a debt obligation owed to the defendant. The bill of exchange is a recognized negotiable instrument under federal law, specifically under UCC Section 3-104, which defines it as an instrument payable on demand or at a fixed time for a specified amount. The defendant, a depository institution participating in the Borrower in Custody BIC program, failed to acknowledge the validity of the bill of exchange as legal tender, despite its express recognition under the Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, Section 401, and 59 Stat. 237, Section 2, which mandate that such instruments are to be accepted at their par value for the payment of debts. The bill of exchange was issued in conjunction with a promissory note, also tendered as payment and pledged collateral, under the BIC program. Federal Reserve Operating Circular Number 10 explicitly requires that all pledged collateral, including promissory notes, and bills of exchange, must be verified as having value and be accepted in compliance with federal regulations. Congress, under its constitutional authority in Article 1, Section 8, has established a uniform legal framework for the regulation of currency and negotiable instruments, including bills of exchange, trade acceptances, and bankers' acceptances. Joint Resolution 10 Public Law 73-10 unequivocally declares such instruments as legal tender for payments of debts, public and private, when properly executed and tendered. Defendants' refusal to accept the bill of exchange and promissory note violates federal law, including 12 U.S. C. Section 347, which authorizes the use of pledged collateral as security for Federal Reserve advances, and 59 Stat. 237, Section 2, which prohibits any instrument's acceptance at less than its par value. Defendant's non-compliance has caused plaintiff undue harm and necessitates judicial intervention to enforce the acceptance of these instruments as payment. Legal framework and analysis. Under federal law, bills of exchange are recognized as legal tender for the payment of debts. The Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, Section 401, explicitly authorizes the use of bills of exchange, promissory notes, and other negotiable instruments as security for Federal Reserve advances and mandates that such instruments be accepted at par value. The defendant's refusal to honor the bill of exchange tendered by plaintiff is a direct violation of this statutory framework and undermines the constitutional intent to standardize legal tender instruments. Joint Resolution 10 Public Law 73-10 reinforces this position by declaring that coin or currency of the United States, including Federal Reserve notes, circulating notes, and all related negotiable instruments, are legal tender for all debts, public and private. Congress's intent to include bills of exchange and related instruments as legal tender is evident in its legislative mandate to regulate the value of all instruments used to discharge debts, ensuring uniformity under Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Defendant is a depository institution, participating in the Borrower in Custody BIC program, is bound by Federal Reserve Operating Circular Number 10, which requires pledged collateral, such as bills of exchange and promissory notes, to have demonstrable value and to be managed in compliance with federal standards. Section 7 of OC 10 further stipulates that pledged collateral must meet stringent requirements for transparency, certification, and periodic reporting. Defendants' failure to comply with these requirements constitutes a breach of federal regulations governing pledged instruments. 59 Stat. 237, Section 2, provides additional legal protection for instruments like bills of exchange and promissory notes, mandating that they be accepted at face value and prohibiting any discounting of their worth. This statutory provision confirms that any refusal to honor these instruments as payment violates both the law and the intent of Congress to ensure the integrity of negotiable instruments in financial transactions. Defendants' refusal also contravenes UCC Section 9-203 and 9-207, which govern secured transactions and expose a duty on secured parties to manage pledged collateral in a commercially reasonable manner. By failing to recognize the bill of exchange and promissory note as valid instruments of payment, defendant has failed to fulfill its fiduciary obligations under federal and state law, further justifying judicial enforcement. Relief requested. Recognition of the bill of exchange and promissory note as valid legal tender under federal law. An order compelling defendant to accept the bill of exchange as payment in full for the debt obligation. A declaration that defendant's refusal to accept the instruments constitutes a violation of federal law. Any relief the court deems just and proper. Conclusion. Based on facts and legal framework outlined above, it is clear that the plaintiff has complied with all federal laws and regulations governing the payment of debts. The defendant's refusal to recognize and accept the bill of exchange and the associated promissory note violates the Federal Reserve Act, Title IV, Section 401 and 59 Stat. 237, Section 2, which mandate the acceptance of such instruments at their par value. The defendant, as a participant in the Borrower in Custody (BIC) program, has a legal obligation under Federal Reserve Operating Circular No. 10, Section 7, to ensure compliance with the program's standards for pledged collateral. The promissory note and bill of exchange tendered by the plaintiff meet these standards, as demonstrated by their recognition under the Securities Act of 1933 and the Uniform Commercial Code, specifically Section 9-203 and 9-207. Congress, under its authority in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, has unequivocally declared its intent to regulate and standardize the use of all negotiable instruments as legal tender for public and private debts. This includes bills of exchange, trade acceptances, drafts, and promissory notes, as recognized under Joint Resolution 10, Public Law 73-10. The defendant's refusal to accept these instruments undermines Congress's intent and violates statutory obligations. Plaintiff is entitled to judicial relief to enforce the acceptance of the bill of exchange as full payment of the debt obligation. Defendant's actions constitute a breach of federal law and fiduciary duties, and plaintiff seeks an order compelling the defendant to comply with its legal obligations and accept the tendered instruments as payment in full. Plaintiff further requests any additional relief deemed just and proper by this court, including cost, fees, and damages arising from the defendant's non-compliance. Very truly yours. By blank, plaintiff. A. For parties without an attorney. I agree to provide the clerk's office with any changes to my address where case-related papers may be served. I understand that my failure to keep a current address on file with the clerk's office may result in the dismissal of my case. Date of signing. Signature of plaintiff. Printed name of plaintiff. B. For attorneys. Date of signing. Signature of attorney. City, state, zip code. Telephone number. Blank. Email address. Blank.